Maryse Jansen. I'm a wildlife and nature photographer in Queensland, Australia. Originally, I'm from the Netherlands and I moved over here in 2009. As I had a little child, 5 years old at the time, we both went and started exploring this new country, and we found it was fascinating, wonderful nature, wonderful wildlife, like you see nowhere else in the world. Photography was already a great love of mine. I started capturing all of that, spend my time, and we learned a lot together. And finally, now that my child is grown up and is at uni, I started sharing my images with the world. But I felt I wanted to do more than that because Australian nature is so unique and amazing. I really wanted to do more to share it and celebrate that with the world. I get people to appreciate it, be inspired to help conserve our beautiful nature and planet, because that's necessary, obviously, at the moment. So I started a blog last year, started writing stories about my images, what you see in the images, some interesting stories behind them and how I took them. And this year I added another new project, which is a YouTube video series called Come for a Walk in the Australian Bush. I take you for a walk with me and just share what we see along the way. You get an impression of the way I work too, because I call myself an opportunistic photographer. I'm not one to lie in a bird hide for 8 hours, wait for the perfect shot, which I absolutely respect the people who do that, but it's not how I work. I go for a walk. I open my eyes and my ears and I see what crosses my path and I take advantage of that. I feel that way. I've learned so much about the Australian nature. I can share that with you in these videos. Each walk is literally filmed in one single walk. So it gives you a really authentic idea of what you can experience if you come for a walk in the Australian bush with me. Well, this is the one that's behind me. I took this photo on one of my favorite treks that I walk regularly. It's a typical Australian bush scene. The special thing about this one is that it's taken in the season where the gum trees shed their bark. This is something they do to get rid of parasites that grow on them, like mosses and lichen. The trunks look normally just brown-gray and a bit dull, maybe like the one you see on the left. As they start shedding their bark, they reveal the most stunning colors, like in this section, this quite red color, and it really brightens up the forest. So I thought that was quite beautiful, contrasting with the blue sky. So I took this one in summer because that's when this happens. It doesn't take much imagination to hear the cicadas in the background when you look at this image, which complete the experience of this Australian bush scene. This one is taken on an outback road during one of my road trips. As you can see, we're driving straight into an area where there's a bushfire, so we had to turn around, but not before I got out of the car and took this photo, because I thought it was just a stunning scene with that deep red dirt and the trees lined with smoke. When you look really, really closely, you could perhaps see a black kite flying right at the edge of the smoke. These are birds of prey that tend to do that, flying around at the edge of bushfires and waiting for prey that comes running out. I actually wrote a whole story about bushfires for my blog. They are usually seen as a natural disaster or a threat, but that's not always the case. They are a very common part of the Australian landscape. So it's quite interesting to learn about all the different types of bushfires. This piece is one from my sand art series. Beaches have lots of interesting things to offer, which is why I created a whole series of that. And really, in nature, there's art everywhere if you look close enough. This art here is made by little sand crabs. They're called bubbler crabs, and they live in little air bubbles under the surface of the sand where they wait out the high tide. And as soon as the tide goes out, they come up and start feeding. They do that by filtering the sand through their mouth parts, and they leave behind these little balls of sand, which they discard. And they create the most amazing patterns on the beach. And in combination with the shade of the late afternoon sun, this made a very interesting abstract image. Yes, this is an eastern grey kangaroo. Australia wouldn't be complete without kangaroos, of course. Everybody in the world knows that. I encounter these quite regularly on my little expeditions. This one was taken somewhere in central Queensland. So kangaroos are quite friendly animals if you don't threaten them, if you don't come too close. They can sometimes come quite close to you when you're on campgrounds in the bush. One day, a really good opportunity arose to create this beautiful portrait. I love the long eyelashes. This one was a mother, actually. She had a little Joey in her pouch. Yeah, well, the thing with most wildlife is when you keep still so that they don't feel threatened, they sometimes can get reasonably close to you. Yes, the other Australian icon is the koala, of course. Koalas are endangered, and I am so lucky to live in an area where there are still some around. So it's pretty special when I see them. And even more so now that they have been declared endangered, it is a privilege to see them and be able to capture them and share them with the world. So this is another one of my koalas. This is how you will most often find them, sleeping in a tree, because they sleep most of the time, and the other time they'll be eating. They eat the leaves of the eucalypt trees, which are not very nutritious at all. So they need to eat a lot, and it doesn't give them a lot of energy. And that's why they sleep so much, because they are so endangered and threatened. I decided to create a special collection called Save the Koala. If anyone decides to buy one of the prints with a koala in it from me, then I will donate half of my proceeds to a koala conservation project. Australia is well known for its snakes. It has many, many, many different species. They bring up mixed emotions in people, most of the time fear. For good reason, of course, because the venomous snakes really are life-threateningly dangerous. This one, however, is a carpet python, and it's not very dangerous to humans at all. It's a beautifully patterned snake. Pythons are constriction snakes, so they don't have venom. This one is curled up in a tree, and it looks like it's sleeping, but you can never be sure. It might just be lying in ambush. You can see that by the S-shaped. The S-shape is where snakes are ready to strike. Generally, pythons are quite common in forests and also in urban areas. They like to live in the rafters of houses. This is a saltwater crocodile. They are very notorious in Australia. They are very dangerous to human beings. So it's really not a good idea to get close to these ones. You might wonder how I got this image then, because it's a pretty close-up image. I got it from a boat. This was up on the Daintree River in North Queensland, where these crocodiles are abundant. So it's absolutely vital that you don't go near the water at all. They're amazing animals. They are like dinosaurs. They've been around forever. Very important apex predators in the ecosystem. This is the rainbow lorikeet. I think it's one of the most well-known Australian birds. It's very popular because of its beautiful colors. Also, its behavior. They're very chattery, social birds. They're very present in the suburbs, and they usually hang around in big flocks. So they make a lot of noise. They love to visit your backyard if you've got some flowering trees where they love to get the nectar from and the pollen which they eat. So like gum trees and those type of trees is what they like to visit. They are amazing acrobatic flyers. They're very agile, which they need to be to avoid being taken by raptors. Their strategy is go in big flocks and fly around like crazy at high speed, changing directions quickly. And that way it's not so easy for the raptors to take them out of the air. This bird is the variegated fairy wren, another very popular Australian bird, and it's obvious why. The beautiful metallic blue colors. These colors are not always on them. It's actually the male breeding plumage that brings this forth. The females and the non-breeding males are usually very dull brown grayish. They're very tiny birds. They're very shy, and they hop around in the undergrowth looking for food. So it's pretty difficult to get a clean shot of them, because as soon as you move, they're gone, and they're usually concealed by all sorts of leaves and branches. So it took me a while and lots of attempts to finally get this great shot. This is called the masked lapwing. It's a type of plover, and it has a very interesting appearance, as you can see. These birds hang out in open spaces. That's where they build their nest, just right in the middle of a big grassy area or something like that. Then they get very defensive about their nests and young. So a common term in Australia, I don't know if you hear that anywhere else in the world, is that birds can swoop you. So they attack you from the air and they just fly overhead and try to attack you or something like that, or hit you with a wing. And this is one of the birds in Australia that tends to do that. People don't always like them, but I have to say that chicks are incredibly cute. These little striped fluffy balls. This is a black-headed skimmer. It's a type of dragonfly. This year that I got a bit of developed an interest in dragonflies, because I noticed there were so many different species around near my local lake and other waterways. So I spent some time with them, photographing them and identifying them, and discovered they're really fascinating creatures with their big eyes where they can see so much. These flowers are from a gum tree. Gum trees have pretty interesting flowers, as you can see, but these are probably the most spectacular ones, and not in the last place because of this bright pink color. They're pretty large as well, whereas most gum tree flowers are a lot smaller and usually a whitish or creamish color. Have similar shapes, so they always consist of these little sort of spiky flowers. As they wilt, they will turn into the famous gum nuts, which contain the seeds of the gum trees. Now, gum trees is just the other common name for eucalypt trees. I think eucalyptus is probably the most common tree in Australia, and there's so many different species of them. Generally, people here call them gum trees. This is a grevillea flower. It's another very typical Australian flower. They come in many different forms, colors, shapes, and sizes, but the general shape of them is always the same. Long shaped flowers with all these little tendrils. Yeah, it's a characteristic of many Australian flowers to have that. I think it's because of that hard sun, so they don't have big petals because they would dry out and wrinkle too quickly. So yeah, when I started taking photos of Australian nature and started learning more about it, that kind of goes hand in hand, because when you take photos, you look closer, you look with different eyes, and you see different things. And then you get interested and you begin learning about them, which then opens up another new world. And then you start taking photos of that, keep taking a deeper dive in, I think, and learning more along the way, that I then felt an urge to also share not just the images, but also the stories, which is why I started my blog and my video series. You know, the more you know about it and you begin to appreciate it, you begin to love it, and you want to protect it. That's how humans work. And yeah, so I'm hoping that by sharing it with other people, that they will also become interested and appreciative and hopefully caring of it. In the end, we are part of it. We are a part of nature, even though some of us have forgotten, but we can't live without it.